I want to be honest about what I was before I found the door, because it matters. It matters more than the door itself. 3 days after the outbreak, I was nobody. I don't mean that in some poetic, self-deprecating way. I mean, I was literally uncounted. No one was looking for me. No shelter had my name on a list. No family member was driving through chaos trying to reach my location. I was a 31-year-old man who delivered pharmaceuticals for a gig app, who owed $11,000 across 4 credit cards, who had been asked to leave a church gymnasium shelter in Breckenridge, Colorado, because I wasn't a resident of Summit County, and space was being rationed by zip code. So I walked. I walked south along Highway 9 with a backpack containing a water bottle, a phone at 6%, a bag of trail mix, and a jacket rated for 40 degrees in weather that was dropping into the 20s at night. I had no weapon. I had no map. I had no plan beyond the vague idea that Fairplay might have something. A shelter, an open store, a building with a door I could close. The first infected I saw was on the shoulder of the highway, about 2 miles south of the Breckenridge city limit. A woman in cycling gear, one shoe missing, standing perfectly still in the median with her head tilted at an angle that told me her neck was broken or close to it. She wasn't moving toward me. She was just standing there, in that locked posture they have when they haven't located stimulus yet. I gave her 200 yards of clearance by cutting through a frozen drainage ditch, and my hands shook for 20 minutes after. I want to be precise about my qualifications for what happened next. I had none. I couldn't start a fire without a lighter. I didn't know which direction was south without my phone. I had never owned a tool more complex than an Allen wrench. The only reason I was alive on day 3 was that I was not important enough to be anywhere dangerous. No one depended on me, so no one's collapse had pulled me in. I had simply walked away from every situation before it became fatal, which is not survival. It's just not having died yet. The terrain south of Breckenridge rises and drops through high-altitude scrubland, old mining land, federal forest that looks the same in every direction if you leave the road. I stayed on the highway because I had no reason to leave it. Around 4 in the afternoon on that third day, a pickup truck blew past me doing 70. The first vehicle I'd seen in 9 hours. It didn't slow down. I watched its taillights disappear around a curve and felt something I want to name accurately. It wasn't abandonment. I hadn't asked for a ride, hadn't signaled. It was confirmation. I was part of the landscape now. A figure on the shoulder, no different from a mile marker. An hour later, I saw the road. Not the highway, a road. An unmarked asphalt spur that cut west off Highway 9 into a stand of lodgepole pine, freshly plowed despite 3 days of no services. The asphalt was dark, clean, heated from below. I could see the snow melting at its edges. That's the detail that stopped me. Heated asphalt. In the middle of the collapse of everything, someone was keeping a private road warm. I followed it. Not because I was brave, because I was cold. And warmth coming from the ground was the most compelling argument I'd encountered in 3 days. The road curved for half a mile through dense forest, rising gently. No signs, no fences, no cameras that I could see, though I would later learn there were 11. At the end of the road was a concrete apron the size of a tennis court set into the hillside. And in the center of the hillside, framed by engineered stone facing, was a door. Not a bunker hatch, not a blast door. A door. Glass and steel, the kind you'd see at a high-end medical clinic. It was lit from within. It was 62 degrees on the other side. I could feel it from 10 feet away. It was open. I stood in front of that door for 4 full minutes. I know the duration because I counted my breaths. An old habit from a brief attempt at meditation that had otherwise left no useful trace on my life. 61 breaths. The warm air pushed outward through the opening in a gentle, steady current. Carrying a faint scent, I couldn't place something between a hospital and a new car. Clean, engineered. What I was thinking, specifically, was this. This is how you die. You walk into the warm place and the door closes, and whatever is inside is worse than what's outside. Every story I'd ever absorbed told me this. The gingerbread house, the Venus flytrap, the deal that's too good. But I want to record what competed with that thought. My fingers were white, not metaphorically. I had been losing circulation for an hour. My left ear had stopped hurting, which I knew meant it had started freezing. The trail mix was gone. The water was gone. The sun was going down, and I had no shelter, no fire, no capacity to build either. I walked in. The corridor was 12 feet wide and sloped gently downward, lit by the recessed LEDs that didn't flicker or hum. The floor was polished concrete, warm underfoot, with a faint radiant heat that I could feel through my shoes. The walls were smooth gray panels with no visible seams. 20 feet in, a second door, also open, and beyond it, a vestibule with a bench. A wall-mounted screen showing a topographic map of the area, and a woman sitting on the bench eating an apple. She looked up at me with no surprise at all. "You should close the outer door behind you," she said. "The system keeps asking." Her name was Priya Chandrasekaran, 38, former operations director for a logistics company in Denver, laid off 4 months before the outbreak. She had arrived 9 hours before me, following the same road, drawn by the same heated asphalt. She was wearing clean clothes that weren't hers, a gray pullover and matching pants, like medical scrubs without the context. "There's a closet past the second vestibule," she said, gesturing with the apple. "Sizes are marked. The system scanned you when you came in. It'll have your measurements already." "The system," I repeated. "That's what I'm calling it. I don't know what else to call it." I would later understand the full dimensions of what she was describing. But in that moment, I processed only what was immediate. Warm air, clean clothes, a woman who was not afraid of me and not asking me to leave. "How many people are down here?" I asked. 43, including you, unless someone else came in behind you." 43. It's bigger than you think. That was the most accurate sentence anyone spoke to me in the first month. Beyond the vestibule, the corridor opened into what I can only describe as a street. An underground street, 60 feet wide and a quarter-mile long, with a vaulted ceiling 30 feet high, lined with residential units on both sides. Glass-fronted, warmly lit, each one a self-contained apartment. The floor was textured stone, not concrete. There were trees, living trees in engineered beds, under grow lights calibrated to simulate overcast daylight. The air moved in a gentle circulation that felt like a breeze. At the far end of the street, visible from the entrance, was an open plaza with tables, a kitchen facility, and a digital display board showing air quality readings, water reserves, caloric inventory, and population count. The number on the board read 43. It changed to 43 as I stood there. It had updated when I crossed the threshold. A man at one of the tables raised a hand in a wave that was more procedural than welcoming. 2 children sat on a bench near the trees, drawing on tablets. Someone was cooking. The smell was garlic and oil. I stood at the entrance of the street and felt the warmth settle into my hands and ears like a verdict. Everything I had been for 31 years, every unpaid bill, every abandoned lease, every gig that paid $11, had deposited me at the mouth of paradise. No one asked my name for 2 hours. The apartment the system assigned me was on the second tier. Unit 217, accessible by a staircase that felt like it belonged in a Scandinavian hotel. 400 square feet, a bed with actual sheets, a bathroom with heated water. Not warmed, heated, to the degree you selected on a digital panel. A small kitchen counter with a refrigerator stocked with vacuum-sealed meals, each labeled with caloric content and expiration date. A closet containing 4 sets of the gray pullover and pants uniform in my exact measurements. I showered for 35 minutes. I stood under the water and watched the grime of 3 days on the highway run off my skin in ice-gray rivulets, and I cried with a completeness I hadn't experienced since I was a child. Not from relief. From the sheer absurdity of the distance between where I had been 4 hours ago and where I was standing. The distance was not geographic. It was categorical. I had crossed from a world where I was freezing to death into a world where the water temperature was adjustable. And no one had asked me to earn the crossing. That was the detail that should have alarmed me. I met the others over the following 12 hours, in the way you meet people in a space designed for ambient interaction. The plaza kitchen, the corridor, the hydroponic garden that occupied an entire sublevel and smelled of basil and damp earth. They were remarkably varied. A retired school principal from Grand Junction named Leonard Bush, 71, who had been driven south from his home by a horde moving through the I-70 corridor. A young couple, Danielle and Marcus Webb, late 20s, who had been camping in the National Forest when the cell towers went silent. A former Army medic named Tomas Reyes, who had arrived on the first day when the door opened, and had been quietly cataloging the facility's medical supplies ever since. Everyone had the same story at the root. They had been on the surface. They had been failing. They had found the road. The door was open. "Did anyone find this place through a message?" I asked Priya over dinner in the plaza. "A broadcast? Directions?" No, everyone walked in cold. 43 people just happened to find a hidden road in the mountains? She set down her fork and gave me a look that contained patience and its limits. 43 people were within walking distance of a heated road in winter during a collapse. The road was the message. The heat was the broadcast. That logic held. I let it hold. I was eating pasta with roasted vegetables in an underground city while the world above was ending, and I was not yet ready to interrogate the generosity. On my second full day underground, I attended what the residents called a systems briefing, led by a man named Carl Engersol, 54, who had arrived on day 1 and assumed an administrative role that no one had formally granted him, but no one contested. He stood in the plaza with a tablet and explained the facility in the clipped, organized manner of someone who had already given this talk several times. The complex, he said, had been built over 12 years by Hanover Price, the founder of Arcadian Systems, a defense technology company that had pivoted to private infrastructure in its final years. Price had spent approximately $2 billion constructing what he called the continuation, a fully self-sustaining underground habitat capable of supporting 300 people for 20 years. Geothermal power, closed-loop water recycling, hydroponic and aquaponic food production, medical facilities, manufacturing capability, a seed vault, a server farm containing a compressed archive of human knowledge. "The system is automated," Engersol said. "It was designed to operate with minimal human input, most of what you interact with. The climate, the lighting, the food distribution, runs on protocols that were set before we arrived." "Where's Price?" someone asked. Engersol paused. It was a brief pause, but I noticed it. "Mr. Price is not currently in the facility," he said. "The system was activated remotely. The door was opened by automated protocol when external conditions met certain thresholds. We're operating under the assumption that Mr. Price intended this facility for exactly this scenario. I looked at Priya. She was watching Angersol's face with the particular attention of someone who had noticed the same pause I had. Neither of us said anything, not yet. On day 4, I was assigned a job. I used the word assigned with precision. I did not volunteer. I did not choose from a list. I woke up on the morning of my 4th day to a notification on the screen in my apartment. The same screen that controlled lighting and temperature that read, Resident 2-17, report to Logistics Hub, sublevel 30800. Role, Distribution Assistant. The Logistics Hub was a warehouse-sized chamber on the 3rd sublevel, stacked floor-to-ceiling with vacuum-sealed supply crates, organized by a labeling system that used alphanumeric codes I couldn't interpret. My supervisor was a woman named Helen Gao, 46, a former shipping manager from Fort Collins who had arrived on day 2 and been assigned to logistics on day 3. The system generates the schedule, Helen told me as she handed me a tablet with my task list. Pull requests come from the residential units, the kitchen, the medical bay, and the agricultural level. You pull the items, scan them, deliver them to the staging area. The system tracks everything. Who reviews the schedule? The system. Who reviews the system? Helen looked at me the way a coworker looks at a new hire who asks about the CEO on the first day. Tolerant, but discouraging. Angersol handles interface questions. Talk to him if you want. I spent 8 hours pulling crates, scanning codes, and delivering sealed packages to staging areas where other assigned workers moved them onward. The work was not difficult. It was, in fact, precisely calibrated to be achievable. The distance is short, the loads manageable, the instructions unambiguous. At the end of the shift, my screen showed a summary. Items processed, efficiency rating, caloric expenditure, and a closing line that read, Contribution logged. Dinner that evening was better than the previous nights. A richer meal, more variety. I mentioned this to Priya, who was eating beside me. Your unit's meal allocation adjusts based on your contribution log, she said. I put my fork down. The food is tied to the work? Not tied, adjusted. Everyone gets a base allocation. The contribution log adds supplementary access, better meals, access to the recreation level, priority scheduling for the exercise facilities. That's a wage. That's what I said. Priya's voice was neutral in a way I was beginning to recognize as her version of alarm. On day 2, I asked Angersol about it. He said it was an incentive architecture. Price's design. The system rewards participation. And if you don't participate? Base allocation, 1,200 calories, apartment access, nothing else. I looked around the plaza. The residents were eating at various tables in clusters of 2 to 5. The meals were not identical. Some tables had what looked like fresh bread, fruit, grilled protein. Others had the vacuum-sealed packets I'd seen in my refrigerator on the first day. The difference was visible. It was, I realized, designed to be visible. That night, I lay in my apartment and thought about the logic. A billionaire builds a survival city. He programs it to open during collapse. Strangers walk in. The system feeds them, houses them, clothes them, and then begins to differentiate based on labor output. The structure was familiar. I had lived inside it my entire adult life. It was just warmer down here. But, and this is the turn I want to mark precisely, the work was not unpleasant. The meals were good. The apartment was warm. The alternative was the surface, where the temperature was dropping and the infected were walking the highways, and no one was offering me 1,200 calories, let alone 2,200. I went back to the logistics hub the next morning at 800 without being asked. By the end of my first week, I had stopped thinking about the surface. The door was still open. I checked once on day 5, walking up the entry corridor until I could see the outer door and the gray sky and the cold pressing in. I stood there for less than a minute. Then I turned around and went back to my shift. The warmth pulled, not with force, with the absence of any reason to resist. On day 9, I met the man who would eventually change the arithmetic of everything. His name was Dale Kinsey. 67 years old, bone-thin, weather-darkened skin, hands that moved with the mechanical surety of someone who had worked physical systems his entire life. He arrived through the front door at mid-morning, alone, carrying a hunting rifle and a canvas pack. I was in the plaza when the population counter on the display board ticked from 51 to 52. Dale walked the length of the underground street, looked at the trees, the residential units, the kitchen facility, and said, to no one in particular, "Well, that son of a bitch actually did it." He knew Hanover Price, not socially, professionally. Dale had been a geotechnical engineer contracted during the first 4 years of the continuation's construction. He had supervised the boring of the main cavern and the installation of the geothermal exchange system. He had been let go, his word, when the project transitioned from excavation to systems integration. I didn't know the full scope, he told me over dinner that first evening. Ingersoll had attempted to intercept him for the standard briefing, but Dale had waved him off with the authority of someone who understood the building better than the tour guide. I knew it was a shelter. I knew the capacity. I didn't know about this. He gestured at the plaza, the lighting, the ambient comfort. The architectural spec I worked from was a hardened facility. Military grade. This is a resort. Why did you come here? Because I know what's under the resort. Dale Kinsey did not elaborate that evening. He ate the base allocation meal without complaint, accepted his apartment assignment, and declined the next morning's work notification with a response I didn't know the system accepted: not available. His meal allocation dropped to base that same day. He didn't seem to notice or care. Over the next 3 days, Dale walked the facility with the attention of an engineer reading a structure he once built. I followed him twice, not because he invited me, but because I was assigned to sub-level 3 and his route passed through my workspace. He would stop at certain junctions, press his hand against a wall, and stand quietly as though listening. Once on sub-level 4, the agricultural level, he crouched beside a floor drain and sniffed the outflow for 30 seconds. "You designed the drainage?" I asked. "I designed the substrate. The drainage is running through my rock cuts. The question is where it's going after it leaves my section." "Where would it go?" He straightened up and looked at me with an expression I would later understand as the look of someone deciding whether to make you complicit. "There are 5 sublevels on the published schematic," he said. "I excavated 7. I didn't respond. I didn't know how to weigh the information. "The bottom 2 aren't on any plan these people have seen," Dale continued. "Ingersoll's been running this place off the residential operating system. That's levels 1 through 5. But the geothermal exchange runs through level 6. And level 7 is where Price put the real infrastructure. Real infrastructure. The part that keeps the lights on and the water hot and the air breathable. The part that requires maintenance. The part that has a service schedule. What happens if it doesn't get serviced?" Dale looked at me the way Helen Gow had looked at me on my first day, but with opposite intent. Helen had been discouraging the question. Dale was waiting for it. The geothermal loop has a filter array that requires manual cleaning every 90 days. If it clogs, the heat exchange fails. If the heat exchange fails, the climate system drops to ambient rock temperature, which at this depth is 44 degrees. The water heating fails. The agricultural grow lights lose power priority. The system doesn't die. It just stops being paradise. When was the last service? I can't access level 6. The doors are sealed to residential credentials. Ingersoll doesn't know they exist. He let that settle. But I built the doors, he said. And I remember the codes. Dale and I descended to level 6 on day 13 at 2 in the morning. While the residential system was in its overnight dimming cycle and the corridor foot traffic had dropped to 0. The access point was behind a maintenance panel on sub-level 5, in a section of corridor that the agricultural workers had been using as overflow storage for empty nutrient containers. Dale removed the panel with a multi-tool from his pack, revealing a keypad that looked 10 years older than anything else in the facility. He entered a 9-digit code without hesitation. A section of wall shifted inward on hydraulic hinges, revealing a stairwell that dropped into darkness. The air that came up was different. Cooler, rawer, carrying the mineral scent of deep rock and machine oil. We descended 42 steps. I counted. Into a corridor that bore no resemblance to the polished residential levels above. Exposed conduit ran along the ceiling. The floor was sealed concrete, cracked in places. The lighting was industrial fluorescent, half the tubes dead. This is what a $2 billion survival facility actually looks like, Dale said. Up there is the sales floor. Down here is the engine room. Level 6 was a single vast chamber, roughly the footprint of the plaza above, but with a 12-foot ceiling and no architectural pretension. The geothermal exchange system occupied the center, a network of insulated pipes running from floor penetrations to a series of heat exchangers the size of commercial refrigerators. The sound was constant, a low, pressurized hum overlaid with the ticking of expansion joints. Dale walked directly to the filter array. It was a bank of 12 cylindrical housings, each 3 feet tall, arranged in series along the primary loop. He opened the first housing, pulled the filter element, and held it up. It was caked with mineral deposit, a thick, chalky buildup that reduced the flow area by what I estimated was 60%. Dale inspected it without expression, then checked the second, the third, the fourth. All identical. 90-day service interval, he said. This buildup is at least 200 days. These filters haven't been touched since before the outbreak. Can you clean them? With tools, water pressure, and about 16 hours, yes. But that's not the point. He replaced the filter and closed the housing. The point is that Price designed a system that requires skilled maintenance on a fixed schedule, then opened the door to random strangers and gave them a system that doesn't mention the maintenance exists. Why? Dale sat on a pipe bracket and rubbed his face with both hands. He was tired in a way that went beyond the hour. Because Hanover Price was supposed to be here. This facility was designed for Price and his selected personnel to occupy and operate. The automated protocol that opened the door. That was the backup plan. The contingency if Price couldn't reach the facility in time. The system opens, admits bodies, keeps them comfortable, and waits for the owner to arrive and initialize full operations. And if the owner never arrives? Then the comfort runs on autopilot until the infrastructure degrades past the point where autopilot can compensate. The filters clog, the heat exchange declines, the agricultural lights brown out. The system doesn't collapse. It slowly becomes unlivable. 2 months, maybe 3, before the residential levels notice. I leaned against the wall and listened to the hum of the machinery that was keeping 52 people alive, without any of them knowing it required keeping. "We should tell Engersol," I said. Engersol is an accountant from Pueblo who has been playing captain for 2 weeks because no one else wanted the clipboard. He will respond to this information by panicking, calling a meeting, and creating a committee. The filters will not be cleaner afterward. Then what do you want to do? Dale looked at me with an evaluation I could feel in my sternum. "I want to go to level 7. And I want you to come because I need someone who can carry things and doesn't have a title to protect." I said yes, because I had never had a title to protect. Level 7 was not a room. It was a residence. We descended another 30 steps from level 6 through a reinforced door that Dale opened with a different code. 12 digits this time, entered slowly, from memory that was reaching for something stored deep. The stairwell was narrower, the walls raw granite with visible drill marks, and the air carried a sealed, undisturbed quality, like opening a closet that has been closed for years. The door at the bottom opened into a private apartment of perhaps 1,200 square feet, finished to a standard so far beyond the residential units above that the comparison was obscene. Hardwood floors, real wood, transported and installed 600 feet below a mountainside. A kitchen with stone countertops and copper fixtures. Bookshelves lining an entire wall, stocked with physical volumes. A bedroom visible through an open doorway, with a king bed dressed in white linens. And sitting in an armchair in the living area, facing the door as though expecting us, was a body. Hanover Price had been dead for some time. The climate control had slowed decomposition, but not prevented it. He was dressed in a dark sweater and khaki pants, seated upright, with a tablet on the side table beside him and a glass that had once contained liquid, now evaporated to a residue. There was no visible trauma, no blood, no wound, no evidence of violence. He looked like a man who had sat down to read and simply stopped. Dale stood in the doorway and stared at the body for a long time. I stayed behind him, breathing through my sleeve, trying to manage the smell that the sealed space had concentrated. "He was here," Dale said quietly. "He made it, and then died." Before the door opened, "Look at the tablet." I didn't want to approach the body, but Dale didn't move, so I did. The tablet was dark, battery dead. I found a charging cable on the kitchen counter, plugged it in, and waited. After 3 minutes, the screen illuminated. The last application open was the facility's master control interface, a version far more comprehensive than anything visible on the residential system. Status panels for every sub-level, every mechanical system, every automated protocol, and, overlaying the interface, a text entry that appeared to be a personal log, with a final entry dated 11 days before the outbreak's official start. The entry read, "Diagnosis confirmed. Inoperable. 8 weeks was the generous estimate. I have activated the contingency protocol early. The door will open when CDC threshold is crossed. I will not be here to manage intake. The residential system will handle triage. I have removed the maintenance alerts from the residential interface to prevent panic in an unmanaged population. The infrastructure team was supposed to be my first intake cohort. They are not coming. I am sorry for what this means." Dale read it over my shoulder. Neither of us spoke for perhaps a full minute. "He died of cancer," Dale said. "Not the outbreak, not the infected. Cancer. He knew the maintenance would fail. He knew everything would fail. He removed the warnings deliberately. He decided that people living in comfortable ignorance was better than people living in informed panic, with no one qualified to act on the information. I sat down on the hardwood floor of a dead billionaire's underground apartment, and tried to process the geometry of what I was inside. A survival city designed by a dying man who could not staff it, opened by automated protocol to random strangers, running on systems that were consuming themselves on a timeline the strangers couldn't see. Everyone above me was living inside a machine that was slowly breaking, maintained by software that had been deliberately blinded to its own decay. "What do we do?" I asked. "We go back up, we clean the filters, we service what I know how to service. And then we have to decide what to tell 50 people who think they've been saved, not whether to tell them." Dale looked at the body of the man who had built everything around us. He made that choice. I don't think it worked. We carried Hanover Price to the far end of Level 7, where a utility corridor dead-ended in sealed rock. Dale selected the location with the pragmatism of an engineer managing a biological problem. We wrapped the body in the white bed linens, placed it against the wall, and sealed the corridor door behind us. There was no ceremony. I wanted there to be. But Dale was already moving back toward the apartment, cataloging what the master control interface could show us. With the tablet charged, the full scope of the continuation status was legible for the first time. Dale sat at the dead man's desk and scrolled through system diagnostics while I stood behind him and tried to understand the numbers. The geothermal exchange was operating at 53% efficiency, declining at a rate that would reach critical threshold in approximately 70 days. The water recycling system had a secondary filter bank on Level 6 that was nearing capacity. The agricultural grow lights were drawing more power than the geothermal system was currently producing, which meant the battery reserves, a lithium installation on Level 6, were being drawn down at a rate that would exhaust them in approximately 140 days. "The math is simple," Dale said. "This facility was built to last 20 years, with a qualified maintenance team rotating through scheduled service. Without that team, it lasts about 8 months from door open. We're at day 13. The clock started before us. Can you fix it? I can fix the geothermal filters. I can service the water system. It's similar to industrial setups I've worked on. The electrical load balancing is beyond me. Price's systems are proprietary, and the automation that's running the residential levels is software I can't access without credentials that are probably on this tablet somewhere." He leaned back and pressed his palms against his eyes. "Here's the real problem. Even if I can stabilize the mechanical systems, they need ongoing maintenance, permanently, which means someone needs to be doing this work continuously. And it needs to be someone who understands what they're looking at. There are 52 people upstairs. How many of them do you think are geotechnical engineers? Just you. Just me. And I'm 67 with a bad valve in my heart that was scheduled for replacement surgery 2 weeks after the world ended. The weight of that sentence settled between us like a change in air pressure. So you need to train someone, I said. I need to train several people. And I need institutional support to do it, which means Engersol, which means disclosure, which means the conversation I've been avoiding. Why have you been avoiding it? Dale lowered his hands and looked at the master control screen, the real screen, the one that showed the facility's actual condition rather than the sanitized residential version. Because right now, 50 people are sleeping well. They're eating, they're working manageable shifts and receiving predictable rewards. They believe they're safe. The moment I tell them the truth, that safety becomes conditional. Conditional on my expertise, my health, my willingness to keep descending to level 6 at 2 in the morning. I become the single point of failure for their entire world. And I've been the single point of failure before, in a marriage and a career. And I can tell you exactly what happens. They resent you for being necessary. They worship you until you make a mistake. Then they replace you with someone less qualified, who tells them what they want to hear. You can't keep it secret. The filters will clog whether or not you tell anyone. I know that. Then what are you actually deciding? He turned in the chair and faced me directly. I'm deciding whether to give these people a problem they can participate in, or a problem they can only watch me solve. Because those two disclosures are different. One makes them citizens. The other makes them hostages to my heartbeat. I understood then that Dale Kinsey was not deciding whether to speak. He was deciding what kind of society to speak into existence. Dale told them on day 15. He did it without consulting Ingersoll first, which was a choice I watched him make in real time over breakfast. Ingersoll was at his usual table, reviewing the contribution logs on his tablet with the focused attention of a man who believes administration is governance. Dale watched him for perhaps 2 minutes, then stood up, walked to the center of the plaza, and spoke in a voice that carried without shouting. My name is Dale Kinsey. I helped build this facility 12 years ago. There are things about its operation that you haven't been told. I need 20 minutes of your time. He laid it out without softening. The 7 levels, the maintenance gap, the filtration timeline, the battery depletion, the body on level 7. He told them about Price's cancer, the contingency protocol, or the deliberate removal of maintenance alerts from the residential system. He told them the math. 70 days on geothermal, 140 on batteries, and declining on both curves. He did not tell them what to do about it. The plaza was silent for approximately 10 seconds after he finished. Then Ingersoll stood up and said, "Why weren't we informed immediately?" And the room divided. What happened over the next 3 days was the most compressed political evolution I have ever witnessed. Ingersoll's position, that Dale had withheld critical information and should be placed under structured oversight, attracted roughly a third of the residents. Dale's position, that the information was meaningless without the skills to act on it, and that he had spent his first days assessing rather than alarming, attracted another third. The remaining third, which included me, Priya, Tomas Reyes, and a shifting coalition of people who didn't care about the politics and wanted to know if the lights were going to stay on, orbited between the factions without committing. The argument was nominally about transparency. It was actually about dependency. Ingersoll's faction couldn't tolerate that one person held irreplaceable knowledge. Dale's faction couldn't tolerate that administrative procedure was being prioritized over mechanical urgency. And my faction, the one that didn't have a name, couldn't tolerate that the entire debate was consuming days during which the filters were still clogging. On day 17, I walked down to level 6 alone, opened the first filter housing the way I'd watched Dale do it, and began scrubbing mineral deposits with a wire brush and water from the utility sink. I didn't ask permission. I didn't announce it. I just went. Dale found me 4 hours later, elbow deep in chalky residue, my gray uniform streaked white. He stood at the entrance of the mechanical chamber and watched me work for a full minute before speaking. "You're using the wrong grade of brush. You'll score the filter media." "Then show me the right one." He did. For 3 hours, he stood beside me and taught me the filter service procedure. The correct tools, the correct pressure, the correct sequence for isolating each housing from the active loop. He taught me how to read the pressure differential gauges that indicated flow restriction. He taught me how to test the heat exchange output at the secondary manifold. "Why me?" I asked at one point. "Because you came down here before you were told to. Everyone else up there is arguing about who has the right to decide whether the filters get cleaned. You just came and cleaned them. That's not a qualification." In this building right now, it's the only one that matters. We finished 8 of the 12 filters that night. The pressure differential improved 19%, which Dale said was enough to buy 3 weeks on the geothermal timeline. We left the remaining 4 for the next day, returned to level 5 filthy and exhausted, and found Ingersoll waiting at the access panel with 2 other residents and a look of institutional fury. "You accessed a restricted level without authorization," he said. Dale walked past him without stopping. "The restricted level isn't on your system, Carl. You can't restrict what you didn't know existed." The political structure of the continuation reorganized itself around the maintenance reality over the next 2 weeks. And it did not reorganize gently. Ingersoll convened a formal governance meeting on day 18, the first of its kind, complete with an agenda he had typed and printed on a device I hadn't known the facility contained. He proposed a council structure. 5 elected members with authority over resource allocation, work assignments, level access, and external contact decisions. The proposal passed 31 to 19, with Dale and me among the 19. The council's first act was to require that all access to levels 6 and 7 be logged and pre-approved by majority vote. Dale voted against this publicly, lost, and then complied. He submitted access requests. The council approved them. The filters got cleaned. The bureaucratic layer added 18 hours to a task that had previously taken 3. I watched this process with the attention of someone who had spent a lifetime being managed by systems designed to extract maximum compliance through minimum transparency. The contribution logs, the meal tiers, the council approval process, Ingersoll's agenda and his printer, Price's original incentive architecture now overlaid with democratic procedure, layer after layer of structure, each one making the system feel more legitimate and less escapable. On day 24, Priya came to my apartment at 11 at night and sat on the edge of my bed without being invited. We had developed a shorthand by then. 2 people who had arrived within hours of each other and recognized in each other the particular wariness of people who had been managed before. "Tomas found something," she said. "In medical, in the records, the master control system that Dale accessed. Tomas has been going through it during his approved access windows. He found the intake protocol documentation, Price's original specifications for how the facility was supposed to operate. And the 300 capacity wasn't for residents. It was for 100 residents and 200 workers. The residential units on levels 1 through 3 were designated for what Price called core personnel, people selected and vetted before the outbreak. The work assignments, the contribution logs, the tiered meal system. That wasn't an incentive architecture. It was a labor management system. The people on the upper levels were supposed to be directing. The people on the lower levels were supposed to be maintaining. I felt the information settle into a framework I had been circling without naming. "We're the workers," I said. We were always the workers. The automated intake protocol doesn't select for skill or status. It selects for warm bodies. The system needs biological labor inputs to perform the maintenance, agriculture, logistics, and sanitation functions that Price's core personnel were supposed to oversee. When the core personnel didn't arrive, the system opened the door and took whoever walked in. And the contribution log tracks labor output per resident, not for incentive purposes, for efficiency management. The tiered meals aren't rewards. They're calibrated caloric allocations designed to optimize physical performance based on assigned workload. I sat with that for a long time. Through my apartment wall, I could hear the faint hum of the ventilation system, the system that Dale and I maintained, that the council approved our maintenance of, that the contribution log recorded our maintenance of. that the caloric allocation system fed us enough to maintain. Priya. Yes. The door is still open. I know. Has anyone left? She was quiet for a moment that stretched. No. In 30 days, 52 people have arrived. No one has left. No one has tried. The contribution log doesn't track departures because the system wasn't designed for voluntary exit. It was designed for retention. It's not locked. It doesn't need to be locked. It's January in the Colorado mountains during a zombie outbreak. The lock is the cold. The lock is the infected. The lock is having nothing on the surface that's better than 1,200 calories and a heated room. She stood up and walked to the door of my apartment. The question isn't whether we can leave, she said. The question is whether we can want to. On day 31, a new group arrived. 9 people, led by a woman named Adrienne Polk, 42, who had been a county emergency manager in Eagle County before the outbreak dissolved the county. They had found the road the same way the rest of us had, by walking south and noticing warmth rising from the ground. But Adrienne was different from the rest of us in a way that mattered immediately. She arrived with information about the outside. The surface was worse than we had imagined, not because the infected were more numerous, though they were, but because organized survivor groups had begun consolidating territory along the I-70 corridor. And their consolidation involved the systematic seizure of resources from undefended positions. Adrienne described 3 settlements she had passed through, each one operating under a strong leader model with enforced labor and rationed food. She described them without moral language, in the clipped syntax of someone reporting conditions rather than judging them. How are they different from here? Dale asked. We were in the plaza, and the question landed like a stone in still water. Adrienne looked around the underground street, the trees, the warm light, the residential units with their glass fronts, and answered carefully. Scale and comfort. The structure is the same. Work for food. Contribute or lose access. Authority concentrated in whoever controls the infrastructure. This is just the version with better lighting. Ingersoll, seated at his council table, did not respond. But I watched his hand tighten around the stylus he used to annotate his agenda. Adrienne's group was processed into apartments, assigned work shifts, entered into the contribution log. Within 48 hours, they had been absorbed so completely that an observer would not have been able to distinguish them from residents who had been here for a month. The system was frictionless. It didn't need to coerce because it had eliminated every alternative. I began spending my evenings on level 7. Not for the maintenance. That continued on schedule, with Dale training 2 additional residents who had mechanical aptitude and the temperament to work in the raw infrastructure levels without claustrophobia or complaint. I went to level 7 because Price's tablet contained more than diagnostic systems. It contained his personal files, correspondence, design documents, and a series of video logs recorded during the final weeks of his life, which I watched alone in the dead man's apartment while 52 people slept above me in the structure his death had activated. Price had been precise in his dying. The videos showed a gaunt man in his late 50s, bald from treatment, speaking into the tablet's camera with the organizational clarity of someone who had run a defense company. He narrated his design philosophy the way an architect presents a building to a client, except the client was no one. The recordings were addressed to the future occupants of the continuation, but Price never uploaded them to the residential system. They existed only on this tablet, on this level, behind doors that the residential system didn't acknowledge. In the 3rd video, Price said something I have not been able to stop hearing since. The system is designed to be accepted before it is understood. Comfort first, questions later. By the time a resident comprehends the structure they're operating within, their participation has already become habitual. This is not a flaw. This is the design. Human beings do not rebel against systems that feed them. They rationalize the system as fair. They interpret their compliance as choice. The contribution log is not a record of work. It is a record of consent, generated incrementally, until the resident cannot distinguish between what they chose and what the architecture chose for them. I paused the video. I sat in Hanover Price's chair, in Hanover Price's apartment, wearing clothes the system had measured me for, fed by calories the system had allocated to me based on my labor output in the system's logistics hub. And I tried to locate the moment when I had consented. I couldn't find it. There was no moment. That was the design. The door upstairs was still open. I could still feel the cold when I stood near it. And I understood finally that the cold was not the lock. I was. I showed the videos to Priya, Dale, Thomas, and Adrienne on day 35, in Price's apartment, on Price's tablet. We sat in the dead man's furniture and watched the dead man explain us to ourselves. The reactions mapped precisely to who each person had been before they walked in the door. Dale was unsurprised. I built infrastructure for the military for 30 years. This is how every installation works. The base doesn't ask if you want to live there. It makes living there comfortable enough that you stop asking yourself. Tomas was angry. He designed a system to turn refugees into employees and then remove the part that would let them know they were being managed. That's not survival architecture. That's a trap. Adrienne was analytical. The system works. 52 people are alive, fed, and sheltered. The question isn't whether it's manipulative. The question is whether the manipulation matters if the alternative is death. Priya said nothing for a long time. Then she asked the question that none of us had. Who are we going to tell, and what are we going to ask them to do? Because that was the real problem. We could show the videos to everyone. We could explain the labor management system, the contribution log's true function, the deliberate removal of maintenance visibility. We could hold the disclosure in the plaza and let 52 people see exactly what Price had built. And then what? The system would still be the system. The geothermal would still need servicing. The food would still need growing. The work would still need doing. Knowledge of the cage doesn't open the cage when the cage is also the only warm room. I argued for disclosure. Priya argued for disclosure. Thomas argued for disclosure with immediate structural reform. Dale argued for disclosure paired with a maintenance transition plan. Adrienne sat silently through the entire debate and then said, "You're all assuming the information changes the incentive. It won't. People who are warm and fed will choose to stay warm and fed. You'll tell them the truth and they'll nod and go back to their shifts. The only people the information will change are the ones who are already uncomfortable. And those people are already in this room." She was right. I knew she was right because I recognized the dynamic from every job I'd ever held. The employee handbook describes the relationship. The employee reads it and signs it and goes to work the next morning. Knowledge of the structure is not resistance to the structure. It is the final stage of the structure's integration. We argued for 3 more days. During those 3 days, I continued my shifts in the logistics hub. Dale continued his maintenance descents. Tomas continued his medical inventory. The contribution log continued to record our labor as consent. The system did not pause for our crisis of understanding. On day 38, 2 things happened in the same hour. First, a new group of 14 arrived through the still open door, raising the population to 66. They were hungry, cold, frightened, and grateful in the specific way of people who have been offered survival without conditions. They accepted the apartments, the uniforms, the work assignments, the contribution logs. They accepted everything in under 3 hours. I watched them and recognized myself from 5 weeks prior. The version of me that had stood in warm water and cried and asked no questions. Second, Dale collapsed on level 6 during a routine filter inspection. Tomas, who happened to be descending to retrieve medical supplies from the lower storage, found him on the floor of the mechanical chamber, conscious but gray, with a pulse that Tomas described as trying to leave. I was in the logistics hub when Tomas radioed. I dropped what I was carrying and ran. I descended 5 flights of stairs and found Dale sitting against the heat exchanger with his hand on his chest and an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Fear, not of dying before the maintenance knowledge had been transferred. "You're not ready," he said when he saw me. "You've learned the filters and the water system. You haven't learned the electrical. You haven't learned the ventilation calibration. You're not ready." Dale survived the cardiac event. Tomas stabilized him with medications from the medical bay. Nitroglycerin, aspirin, a beta blocker that the facility's pharmacy had stocked in quantities sufficient for a population that would never need it this soon. Dale spent 4 days in bed on level 7, in Price's apartment. Because the medical bay on level 2 had no monitoring equipment sophisticated enough for cardiac care. And because Dale refused to recover under Ingersoll's administrative observation. I spent those 4 days in a condition I can only describe as accelerated apprenticeship delivered by a man who believed each lesson might be his last. Dale taught from the bed, using the master-controlled tablet to walk me through schematics. Electrical load balancing, ventilation fan calibration, the sequence for testing the lithium battery array's cell health, the emergency protocols for geothermal loop isolation if a pipe joint failed. "You're memorizing," he said on the 3rd day. "Stop memorizing. Understand the system. If you memorize, you can only do what I've shown you. If you understand, you can improvise when something fails that I didn't predict. I'm a delivery driver, Dale. You were a delivery driver. Now you're the person who keeps the lights on for 66 people. Adjust." On the 5th day, Dale stood up, walked to level 6, inspected the work I had done on the secondary water filters, and pronounced it adequate. Not good, adequate. From Dale Kinsey, that was a commendation. That evening, I called the meeting I had been avoiding. Not a governance meeting, not a council session. I stood in the plaza at dinner and asked for attention, and I told them what I knew. All of it. The 7 levels, Price's body, the videos, the labor management design, the contribution log's true architecture, the maintenance timeline and what it meant. I did not tell them what to do. I told them what was true. The silence lasted longer than it had after Dale's disclosure. This was different information. Dale had told them the building was fragile. I was telling them the building was a design for their capture, built by a man who died before he could operate it, now running on rules authored by a corpse. Leonard Bush, the retired school principal, was the first to speak. "Are you saying we should leave?" "I'm saying you should know what you're in before you decide to stay." Where would we go? And there it was, the question that Price had engineered into the foundations. Where would you go? The question that the heated road answered before it was asked. The question that the January cold made rhetorical. Danielle Webb, the young woman who had been camping with her husband when the world ended, stood up. "I don't care who designed it or why. My daughter was born in the medical bay on level 2 3 weeks ago. She has never been cold. She has never been hungry. If this is a labor system, Then it's a labor system that kept my baby alive. I'll work. 14 people nodded. Then 20. Then more. Not everyone. Tomas was shaking his head slowly, and Adrienne was watching me with the expression of someone who had predicted this exact outcome. But enough. Enough to demonstrate that Adrienne had been right. Comfort metabolizes critique. Warmth digests dissent. The information changed nothing because the incentive structure was thermodynamic, not ideological. After the meeting, Priya found me in the corridor outside my apartment. "You did the right thing," she said. "It didn't matter." "It mattered to you. It mattered to me. It mattered to Thomas and Adrian and Dale. That's 5 people who understand what they're choosing. And 61 who chose not to understand. 61 who chose warmth over information. That's not stupidity. That's survival. It's what Price designed. Yes, and Price is dead. And the system is running. And you're the one who keeps it running. So the question isn't whether they chose freely. The question is whether you're going to keep maintaining a machine whose purpose you find unconscionable. She waited for my answer. I didn't have one. I maintained the machine for another 47 days. I descended to level 6 every 72 hours for filter inspection. I monitored the battery array weekly. I calibrated the ventilation fans bi-weekly. I trained 2 additional residents, a former plumber named Keith, and a young electrical engineering student named Rosa, in basic systems maintenance. I created a written manual, stored on Price's tablet and copied onto paper describing every service procedure I had learned from Dale, in a format that someone without engineering experience could follow. Dale watched the training with the satisfaction of a man seeing his knowledge outlive his body's reliability. His heart held, but his capacity diminished. He supervised rather than performed. He checked my work rather than doing his own. On day 60, he told me he estimated he had 2 functional years left if he managed his exertion carefully, and 0 if he continued descending to level 6. The population reached 89. Every new arrival followed the pattern. Cold, grateful, absorbed. The contribution log grew. The council expanded to 7 members. Ingersoll remained chair. The meal tiers stabilized into a hierarchy so normalized that residents referred to their caloric level by number without irony. I'm a 1900. She's a 22. I was a 2400. The highest allocation in the facility, reflecting my role in infrastructure maintenance. I ate better than anyone. I slept in the same 400 square foot apartment, but my refrigerator contained fresh produce from the hydroponic level, protein from the aquaponic system, and bread baked in the kitchen by a resident whose entire contribution was making bread for the upper-tier workers. The system fed me best because I was most essential to the system's continuation. The circularity was perfect and unbreakable. On day 79, I descended to level 7 alone, sat in Price's chair, and rewatched his final video. The system is designed to be accepted before it is understood. I understood it. I had understood it for months. Understanding had not freed me. Understanding had made me the most efficient component. Priya had stopped eating supplementary meals. She had voluntarily reduced her contribution hours to the minimum, accepting the base 1,200 calories in what she described as a personal experiment in discomfort tolerance. She was thinner. She was also the most alert person in the facility. Stripped of the caloric sedation, she operated with a clarity that I recognized as dangerous to the system and essential to her own selfhood. "You're going to leave," she said to me on day 80, in the corridor near the ascending ramp to the surface door. I don't know. You know, you've been writing the maintenance manual for 2 weeks. You're not writing it for yourself. You're writing it for the person who replaces you. I didn't deny it. Where will you go? She asked. And I heard Leonard Bush's question, and Price's question, and the question the heated road asked every stranger who found it. I don't know. That's the first honest answer you've given since you walked in. I climbed the ascending corridor that night, past the vestibule, past the map screen, past the bench where Priya had been eating an apple on the day I arrived. I opened the inner door. I walked to the outer door, still open, as it had been since before any of us arrived. As it would remain until someone chose to close it or the automation failed. The night air hit my face at 14 degrees. The stars were out, more than I had ever seen. The light pollution of civilization finally extinguished. The tree line was black against the sky. Somewhere in the distance, moving across the frozen highway, I could see shapes, 2, maybe 3, in that halting, locked gate. Behind me, the warm air pushed outward in its gentle, engineered current. I stood in the doorway for a long time. Not 4 minutes this time, longer. Long enough for the cold to reach my fingers and my ears and the place in my chest where the warmth had settled so deeply I had mistaken it for something I chose. Then I stepped forward. I walked north, back the way I had come, along the heated road, past the concrete apron, into the frozen lodgepole forest where the asphalt ended and the cold became absolute. I carried a pack with 72 hours of vacuum-sealed meals, a water filter, a knife, and the maintenance manual I had written. Not for myself, but because Keith and Rosa would need it, and because I needed proof that my time inside had produced something besides my own compliance. I don't know if leaving was brave. I know it was the first thing I did inside the continuation that the system hadn't predicted, allocated, logged, and fed back to me as evidence of my own willing participation. Priya did not come with me. She chose to stay and reduce, to occupy the system at its minimum, to be the irritant in the architecture, the 1,200-calorie conscience. Her resistance was structural. Mine was geographic. I don't know which one matters more. The door is still open behind me. The road is still warm. If you find it, you'll walk in. Everyone does. I'm telling you this so that when the system starts to feel like something you chose, you'll remember that a man who couldn't find the moment he consented decided the only proof of freedom was the willingness to be cold again.